Hello and welcome back to 209 Prep Sport. Back in the studio by myself today. Scott's out of town for work. Pretty interesting week last week. A lot of really good games. We had some pretty interesting matchups before the games were played on Friday night. That I don't think that they evolved into the game that we thought they were that they would. But I think at the end of the week there was a lot of offensive displays of talent this week. Very difficult picking our player of the week this week and things like that. But let's go ahead and start it off with the scoreboard. Thursday night was the very first game of the week that week. Central Catholic had hosted San Ramon Valley. Central Catholic goes down early in the game, but ties it going into half. So it was 7-7 going into halftime. They come out in the second half and score 2 touchdowns in the third quarter, only answered with one score by San Ramon Valley, and Central Catholic ends up winning that game 21-14. Looked like the offensive production was pretty spread out. Didn't look like anybody really stood out any more than anyone else. It looked like a team performance. So congrats to Central Catholic on winning that game. Getting into the next game, Central of Fresno comes up to Stockton to play Edison. No stats for the game. Very tightly contested. Central's always is a perennial state contender. Edison is the elite of the programs in the area at this point. And so for Central to come up here and beat Edison 17-10, I don't think anybody expected a blowout one way or the other, but I think it was a relatively low scoring. Good performance by Edison, to put up 10 on Central, but at the end of the day, Central wins that game 17-10. Moving right along to our next game, Houston. This is kind of a shocking score. Somerville gives Houston a heck of a game. There's no statistics on the game, but I thought it was more interesting how low scoring it was. So Houston wins 8-6, assuming it was a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. I think I read or saw something online that Somerville actually scored first in that game, and I think they missed the extra point. So they were up 6-0, and Houston may have got a touchdown and a safety, but it looks like they probably went for 2. So Houston wins that game 8-6. Moving along to our next game, Ripon gets in the win column this week. Ripon takes on Calaveras. Calaveras comes down to Ripon. Again, no statistics for either team, but the breakdown of the scoring, Ripon jumps all on them and scores 2 touchdowns in the first quarter, so they're up 14-0. Going into halftime, they score another touchdown. They're up 21-0. Calaveras has a score in the third quarter, but Ripon also scores in the third quarter. And the final ends up being 34-7. So pretty well played game by Ripon. Got to feel good for them to get back in the win column. And Calaveras is having their woes this season, it looks like, but I expect them that they'll turn it around at some point. So moving right along to the next game, Argonaut played Riverbank. I do have a box score for both teams for this game. Bo Davis was the quarterback at Argonaut. He was 5 for 7 for 167 and 2 touchdowns. It was a very spread out running game. The leading rusher for Argonaut was Mateo Flores. He had 3 carries for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns. Colby Eckert added 4 more carries for 125 yards, no touchdowns. And then Braden Welch had 3 carries for 15 yards and a touchdown, as well as Spigarelli, score has 3 carries for 45 yards and a score. On the receiving side of it, Josiah Sanders had 1 catch for 60 yards and a touchdown, and Colby Eckert added 2 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown. As far as Riverbank goes, looks like the leading rusher was Alex Nesperos. He had 18 carries for 63 yards. There were no receiving stats added for Riverbank. The final in that game is Argonaut 48, Riverbank 2. Moving right along, Tracy goes down to Pacheco, puts it on him pretty good. Final score being 48-0. Tracy had Drew Frederick had 2 passes, or had 5 attempts, two completions for 35 yards and a touchdown. Ross Escobar also added a one pass, one completion for 28 yards and a touchdown. The leading rusher was Austin Hoysey, or Hoysai, had 13 carries for 84 yards and a touchdown. Ross Escobar also had 4 carries for 34 yards and a touchdown. Kyle Wright had 3 for 12 and a touchdown, and Cody Lammertz had 3 for 11 and a touchdown. On the receiving side, Curtis Maynor had 2 catches for 44 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tracy ends up winning this game 48-0, so pretty good showing by Tracy. Moving right along, we will cover the Union Mine Amador game. Union Mine comes down to Amador and prevails in this game. They end up winning the game 42-8. They scored all 42 points in the first half. Amador scored their 8 points in the second half. No statistics for Amador. So that final ended up being 42-8. Pretty tough game for the Amador Buffaloes this last Friday night. Moving on to our next game, we'll cover the Sonora Hillmar game. Sonora comes down to Hillmar. Sonora looks to be the class of the MLL. Comes down to the Hillmar Yellow Jackets. Hillmar is what Hillmar is. They're very well-rounded. Cameron Moak had 9 completions on 22 attempts for 198 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Rushing, they had 5 different guys carry the ball. The leading rusher was Luis Vargas. He had 6 carries for 52 yards. Westmoreland had 5 carries for 43 yards. And Cannon Ireland added 5 carries for 20 yards. The scoring was done by Derek Taylor. He had 4 catches for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Hillmar ends up winning this game 28-21. Sure, it was a very, very good game between 2 very strong middle-sized schools. So, in what would probably be considered the upset of the week, or in some eyes, but I'm probably not as much of an upset as a shocker as far as what the score was. Kimball goes to Escalon. Kimball scores 54. Escalon only scores 14. Nick Coronado just has himself a day. He's 33 for 41 for 516 yards, 5 touchdowns, no picks, for a 160.8 quarterback rating. He also rushed 5 times for 50 yards. Sebastian Tate added 113 yards on the ground on 20 carries and a touchdown. The leading receiver for Kimball is Willie Clifton. He had 10 catches for 188 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Mason Rivera had 8 catches for 140 and 2 touchdowns. And not to be outdone, Travis Marrero and Eric Gordon both added over 70 yards receiving, with Marrero having 5 catches and Eric Gordon having 7 catches. As far as Escalon goes, Rosevink was 10 for 22 for 157, 2 touchdowns and 5 picks. Rushing the ball, the leading rusher, it looks like it was Reichert Peters. He had 9 carries for 44 yards, and J.P. Lyle added 7 carries for 27 yards. Receiving, looks like Logan Anderson was the leading receiver with 4 catches and 62 yards and a touchdown, and E.J. Lewis added 2 catches for 22 yards and a touchdown. Not that it wasn't expected that Kimball would win that game. I just think the score was kind of surprising to see Escalon only put up 14 on Kimball. I expected a high scoring game, but and especially it being at Escalon on grass, so it was kind of surprising. But at the end of the day, Kimball's an offensive juggernaut, and they showed themselves to be that once again. So moving right along to the Linden Galt game. Linden goes up to Galt, wins 28-7. Pretty tough game, all the way around. Galt went down on their first possession, scored a touchdown, and then Linden waits until about halftime to tie it, go, and they're up 10-7 at half. Linden ran the ball pretty well. They had 118 yards on 21 carries by Joe Cowan. Alex Herrera added 11 carries for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cowan also had 2 touchdowns. Herrera was only 5 for 20 throwing the ball, and for 110 yards and 2 picks. And Joe Stearns 1 for 20 yards. Receiving, nothing really outstanding at this point. Joe Cowan had 2 catches for 45 yards, and Jordan Sherman had 2 catches for 31 yards. The next game we'll talk about is the Franklin Weston Ranch game. Franklin Still working on this, on turning their program around. They go to Western Ranch, win this game 18-13. Both teams waited till the second quarter to score, and then Franklin ends up scoring touchdowns or multiple field goals in each of the second, third, and fourth quarter to put their 18 on the board. Western Ranch scores a touchdown, and it looks like they might have scored a second touchdown, missed the 2-point conversion. So the final in that game ends up being 18-13. No stats for Franklin. On the Western Ranch side, Brown Sanger was 8 for 15 for 104, a touchdown and 2 picks. Deontay Levon had 11 receptions for 113 yards and a touchdown, and Brown Sanger added, this is rushing. He had 9. My bad. He had 9 carries for 80 yards, and Dante Levon had 11 carries for 113 and a touchdown. On the receiving side, Elijah Rivers had 3 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown. So this was it looks like a pretty toughly contested game. Both teams trying to do their best to stay in the mix in their respective conferences. So this is a really good win for Franklin to keep that chugging along. Moving right along, Manteca goes down to perennial contender Turlock. Manteca prevails 44-36. We have the same old characters in this game. Garrison Reese was 6 for 8 for 85, a touchdown and a pick. Blake Nicholson had 15 carries for 239, with 91 yards being his long, with 4 rushing touchdowns. And Elijah Cotta added 7 carries for 26 yards. On the receiving side of the ball, Blake Nicholson also had 2 catches for 41 yards and a touchdown, and Trey Moreland had 2 catches for 23 yards, no touchdown. So Manteca ends up winning this game 44-36, high-scoring game. Manteca just keeps trucking right along, making it tough for their opponents to come out and play a tough game against them, and Blake Nicholson just being Blake Nicholson. So moving down to Mountain House, West travels not too far away from their home stadium to play Mountain House. The West ends up prevailing in this game 14-12. Mountain House is the only one with stats, so Amari Brooks was 10 for 22 for 135, a touchdown and 2 picks. Rushing was Amari Brooks. He had 3 carries, 48 yards, no touchdowns. And then on the receiving side of the ball, D. Francis III had 6 catches for 118 and a touchdown. So pretty good game for him, with West prevailing 14-12 over Mountain House. Moving right along, Tokay goes out to the East Bay, plays Concord, leaves that game at 25-0 victor. Brandon Moreno was the leading passer for Tokay. He was 8 for 16 for 87 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. Barrett Crosby had 13 carries for 77 yards, and Xavier Moreno had 10 carries for 66 yards. Crosby also added a touchdown. On the receiving side of the ball, the leading receiver was Andrew Magoza. He had 3 catches for 37 yards. Isaac Delgado had 2 catches for 21 and a touchdown. Isaiah G had 1 catch for 10 yards and a touchdown, and Marcus Morellis had 1 catch for 19 yards and a touchdown. So looks like Tokay stays undefeated, playing going out to the Bay Area to play a Concord team that I'm sure they didn't have a whole lot of familiarity with. Moving right along, Lincoln comes down to Lodi. Lodi stays undefeated as well. Lodi ends up winning this game 38-7. No statistics for either team, so it's kind of hard to break it down. Looks like Lodi scored 21 in the first quarter, 14 in the second quarter, and 3 in the third quarter. Probably had a running clock moving, so that game kind of went along relatively quickly. Moving right along, Buick Colony comes up to Stockton to take on Lincoln. Lincoln blows them out 50-0. Buick was 2 for 11. Hendrickson was 2 for 11 for 6 yards. No touchdowns, no picks. Rushing the ball, their leading rusher was 9 for 29. Was Jordan Colbert. Getting into the Lincoln side of the ball, there were no statistics. I did read some stuff online. Looked like Kenyon Nelson had a really good game, as well as Jonah Coleman. But it's no statistics, so to speak of. So too hard to get too invested in that and give you guys misinformation. So Bear Creek plays Franklin of Elk Grove. Franklin wins this game handily, 64-15. Again, no statistics to speak of, so we'll just have to leave that there. Sierra comes up to Stockton to play Stag. Stag ends up winning this game 49-35. We do have some statistics for this game. For Stag, Angel Gonzalez was the leading passer. He was 10 for 15 for 262 and 4 touchdowns, no picks. The leading rusher was Willie Turner. Great game, 16 carries, 253 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And the leading receiver in this game was Thomas Gray, had 3 catches for 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. Lockhart III had 2 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown, and Willie Turner also added 2 catches for 97 yards and a touchdown. So pretty good day for Willie Turner, having 365 total yards against Sierra. Again, Stag wins this game 49-35. Moving right along, Atwater comes up to Manteca to take on East Union. East Union keeps it moving pretty good this week. They win 54-7. As far as the box score goes, Atwater with no statistics. Our old friend Luke Weaver had 27 completions on 31 attempts for 379 yards and a touchdown. Or 3 touchdowns, I'm sorry. Luke also rushed 4 times for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. David Flores added 9 carries for 88 yards and a touchdown. And Jonte Maggard added 9 carries for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. The leading receiver for East Union was Dylan Lee. He had 7 catches for 155 and a touchdown. Nicholas Luna was 3 for 62 and a touchdown. And then Kanoa Ontai was 7 for 61 and a touchdown. So again, another pretty respectable or pretty decisive offensive performance for East Union. Pretty impressive to watch, to see this happening week in and week out, with Luke Weaver and his cast of offensive players. Moving along, we go up to Galt. Bear River comes down to Liberty Ranch. Liberty Ranch prevails 35-3. Liberty Ranch scored 28 in the first half, kind of coast to victory. The no passing statistics for Liberty Ranch, but their leading rusher was Arthur Drager. He had 23 carries for 201 and 4 touchdowns. And not to be then you have Brett Hughes had 4 carries for 56, and Kamani Fanika had 6 carries for 42 yards. No touchdowns for Kamani. The next game that we'll go to is the Chavez plays Wood Vacaville. Wood beats them pretty handily, 46-6. Chavez has not entered any statistics, so tough game for Chavez. Oakdale takes on Archbishop Mitty. Archbishop Mitty comes into Oakdale. Oakdale wins this game handily, 56-13. Archbishop Mitty has statistics. Oakdale does not, so it's hard for us to break anything down on this. I will say that the final score was 56-13. That was going to be it for the Friday games. Moving into Saturday, only 2 games to speak of in our area. Forest Hill comes down to Delta Charter and wins that game 52-6. St. Mary's jumps on a bus and goes over to San Francisco and take on St. Ignatius. I was at this game. Pretty good game. Cruz Herrera was 12 for 23 for 176 and a touchdown, no picks. Jaden Marshall had himself a day. He had 11 carries for 162 yards and 2 touchdowns. Samson Hunkin added 2 carries for 32 yards, and Jason Calvin had 7 carries for 32 yards. Also rushing the ball was Asante Carter. Asante got the bulk of the carries. He had 18 carries for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. Receiving, Jaden Marshall had 7 catches for 102. And Max Lucchesi had 2 for 31 and a touchdown. Jason Calvin added a reception for 24 yards. This is a pretty good game. St. Mary's got ahead pretty handily in the first half. They were up 17-10, but really just moved the ball at will, just kind of stalled out here and there. They added an early touchdown in the third quarter, and really they ran the ball nearly the entire third and fourth quarter. I think they threw 3 times the rest of the time. Their defense stood up pretty stout. St. Mary's travels to Bishop O'Dowd this weekend, and And so that should be another interesting matchup for St. Mary's going over into the Bay Area and taking on Bishop O'Dowd. Leading into this week, we'll just touch on a few games before we get to the Player of the Week nominees. Tonight, Buick Colony goes to Downey. Buick Colony looking for their first win. Downey's 2-1. Other games that of note this week, you have Ripon Christian taking on Riverbank. Ripon Christian looking to keep moving, winning some football games. Riverbank looking for their first win as they are 0-2. Sonora comes down to West. Both teams only have one win. Sonora 1-3, West at 1-2. Should be an interesting game. Another really good game to look forward to, especially on the offensive side of the ball. East Union goes to Oakdale. East Union being 3-1, Oakdale 3-0. That game's going to be tomorrow night. Should expect some fireworks there. With both teams being in the VOL, that should be their very first league game. Also worth noting, you have a couple of pretty interesting games, like we mentioned before. The St. Mary's going over to Bishop O'Dowd to play that game. St. Mary's being 1-2, finally getting on in the win column. Bishop O'Dowd 0-2, looking for their first win. Ripon goes down to Modesto Christian to play tomorrow night as well. Ripon trying to stay on the winning track. Modesto Christian trying to get their first win. Pittman coming up to Edison. Edison being 3-1, Pittman 0-2. Should be a pretty good game for Edison to get the offense going again. See how many points they'll score in that game. Pittman's going to have their hands full with a very difficult Edison team. Rosemont is 4-0 coming up to going out to Amador, who's 0-3. So it should be a tough game for them. Two teams looking to get in the win column. Somerville takes on Big Valley Christian. Somerville being 0-2 and Big Valley Christian 0-3. So somebody will get their first win of the year in that game. Franklin tries to stay on the winning path. I think they're breaking, recent records almost weekly at this point. They're 3-1. After I believe Ralph King's taken that program over and done a really good job with them. Argonaut being 1-2. Franklin's going to have their hands full. They're going up to Argonaut and facing a pretty stiff run offense. Manteca is just the offensive machine right now. They take their 4-0 record down to Sierra, over across town to Sierra, who is 0-4. It's going to be a big task for Sierra, but maybe this is their chance to get back on the winning side of the ball. Livingston travels to Hillmar. Livingston being 3-1, taking on Hillmar, trying to give them their first loss, who's 4-0. Hiram Johnson comes down the highway and is going to take on Galt. Hiram Johnson 3-0. Galt's 0-3. Enox will travel up to Stockton, who's taking their 3-0 record, to play Bear Creek, who's 0-4. Weston Ranch is 1-3, taking on Kimball 3-0. Kimball, just dismantling Escalon this last week, so they're going to have a lot of confidence riding into that game. Escalon and Houston. This is probably the game of the week for most teams, or most games, as far as from a competitive standpoint. Both teams run the balls pretty well. They play pretty good defense. This is going to be in Houston, so Houston will try to defend their home field. Escalon coming off their first loss of the season. Houston putting their 4-0 record on the line. Bradshaw Christian will travel to Calaveras and play at Calaveras. I actually think that game may have been canceled. I think I remember reading about that. The next game we'll cover, Waterford and takes their 3-0 record to Delhi, who's 2-0. Aristemba goes to LeGrand. Lodi plays Encinal. Lodi's 2-1. Kind of turning that program, starting to have been on their winning ways, so they're going to take on Encinal. Tracy goes to Vacaville. Tokay takes on Liberty Ranch. Tokay's 4-0 record against Liberty Ranch is 1-1. Stag goes down to Modesto to play. And then on Saturday, we'll wrap it up with just Lincoln of Stockton playing Monterey Trail. Going to be a really good game. I mean, it's a 7:15 at Monterey Trail up in Sacramento. So that's going to be one of those games. Monterey Trail just played De La Salle. They take on pretty much anybody. Lincoln's 1-1 going up to Monterey Trail. Let's see. It'll be interesting to see how that game plays itself out. So as we wrap this show up this week, We'll go ahead and talk about some of the top performers of the week, and before we get to our player of the week. This week we'll start with Stag. Angel Gonzalez was 10 for 15 for 262 and 4 touchdowns. And not to be outdone, Willie Turner had 16 carries for 253 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's a pretty good performance by Willie Turner. This week also, Jaden Marshall had 7 catches for 102 yards with no touchdowns, but had 11 carries for 162 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a really good game by Jaden Marshall against the St. Ignatius team over in San Francisco. Luke Weaver just keeps being Luke Weaver at this point. He's 27 for 31 for 379 and 3 touchdowns, also adding 4 carries for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Luke accounted for 5 touchdowns in that game. Blake Nicholson just keeps doing his thing every week in and week out. Could be the player of the week. This week he had 15 carries for 239, 4 touchdowns, and then he had 2 receptions for 41 yards and a touchdown. But we'll go ahead and go with our player of the week this week, and they're going to give it to the trio. So Nick Coronado was 33 for 41 for 516 and 5 touchdowns. He also added 50 yards rushing. Willie Clifton had 10 catches for 188 and 2 touchdowns, and Mason Rivera had 80 for 140 and 2 touchdowns. So Nick Coronado, Willie Clifton, and Mason Rivera are players of the week this week. We're going to give them the 3-headed monster, the player of the week, and we'll be getting those gift cards out to their athletic directors or getting them sent to them this weekend. So congratulations to everybody. Great week this week. Looking forward to seeing how some of these games prevail. Exciting game with Houston and Escalon. Also, the Lincoln Monterey Trail game should be a really tough game. Expect to have some of these other scores be pretty high score, or other games be pretty high scoring. Again, if you guys have any relationship or communication with coaches, athletic directors, or what have you, make sure your teams are putting in their statistics. It's good for the kid for recruiting. It's good for these programs like ours to make sure that we're getting adequate or accurate stats for these kids. We're really looking forward to promoting the program and the show. And before we get out today, I'd like to thank Justin Fromer for all he's done in the area in the last year and a half or 2 years. He moved in, first job out of school, was reporting on prep sports in our area for the Stockton Record. Justin did a really good job as with everything. He had to try. We cover a very broad area, and there's not very many reporters. There was a day and time there'd be 5, 6, 8, 10 people reporting on high school football, but now it's narrowed down to just a handful of people. And Justin took a job in South Bend, so congratulations to Justin. Good luck to you in your future, and thank you for all you've done for our community and prep sports in the area. With that being said, good luck, everybody. Stay safe. Have a great weekend.